it's time to talk some Miami Dolphins trade targets and whether or not the Miami Dolphins and Chris Grier and the brain trust that is Dolphins Brass should explore this offseason trade market, because a lot of talk of where the Dolphins are salary cap-wise when the new league year starts in March. A lot of talk about free agency, a lot of talk about the draft, and we would be neglecting one important component of the offseason if we didn't include some trade targets. So buckle up, dial it in. Here are some trade targets to keep your eye on. First, beginning on the offensive line, because how many times have we said this repeatedly at this point? The Dolphins' offensive line could use some help. And Laken Tomlinson, a well-traveled NFL veteran, may be available via trade. Now, it will be a little tricky with the Jets being in the same division as the Miami Dolphins, but this is a fellow that was drafted out of Duke, and a lot of times when he was drafted, people would say, if you're going to draft a guard out of Duke, it better be a basketball player. That's good stuff right there, right? I kid. But in 2023, he played pretty well for the Jets, played in 16 out of the 17 games, allowed 7 sacks, and again, it's a well-traveled guy that was originally drafted by the Lions and has worked his way around the NFL, and somebody that brings a veteran presence. He also played in San Francisco from 2017 to 2021 under, guess who, as the offensive coordinator and the run game coordinator. That's right, Mike McDaniel. So there's some continuity there. Obviously, Mike McDaniel knows what Laken Tomlinson can bring to the table from an evaluation perspective. There's some familiarity there. So when you look at this Dolphins offensive line depth chart, a lot of question marks, a lot of free agency, pending free agents, I should say. So maybe on the interior component of the offensive line, Laken Tomlinson fits in nicely there, but again, a little bit tricky given the fact that Laken Tomlinson plays for the New York Jets, who are also in the AFC East. And anytime you're working through a trade within the division, it just adds one more extra layer to it because you're working in the negotiations with a team you're going to be playing twice a year. So they don't want to help you, we don't want to help them, and so on and so forth. But if you think of available offensive line assets on the trade market, I would put Laken Tomlinson at the top of that list and somebody the Dolphins should at least have a conversation with about potentially pursuing. Now, similar to the offensive line, this tight end room could use an upgrade. And no disrespect to Durham Smythe, but I think the idea of trading for another tight end to either pair or replace Durham Smythe as the primary pass catcher makes a lot of sense. Welcome in Dawson Knox, apparently expected to be available on the trade market. And stop me if you've heard this one before, though. Trading with a team in the division could be tough, but Dawson Knox really burst onto the scene early in his career. Some of his best years were early on. 2021 breakout year with the 9 touchdowns and 49 receptions. Slowed things down a little bit the last 2 years, and some of that is because of the emergence of Dalton Kincaid for the Buffalo Bills. Dawson Knox all of a sudden wasn't the primary tight end target in 2023, but I think he still has a lot of gas left in the tank. And this is a Dolphins tight end room. Durham Smythe, it doesn't really wow you. Julian Hill, a very good run blocker, but not necessarily a dynamic pass-catching receiver. And think of the possibilities of adding a dynamic pass-catching tight end like Dawson Knox to this Dolphins tight end room, and in particular the offense that Tua led the NFL in passing yards in 2023, with Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill accounting for over 60% of the receiving yardage. So you add Dawson Knox to the tight end room via the trade, and I think that is a way to boost the overall offense and the overall roster for the Miami Dolphins. But there's the tricky part. Knox is set to make over $14 million in the upcoming season, so there would have to be some restructuring that's done by Chris Grier and the Miami Dolphins as far as how you could make that work contractually and how he could become a part of the Dolphins, not to mention the fact that it's also an in-division trade. But anytime there's a prominent tight end available on the trade market, I like the idea of discussing the potential of bringing that tight end in. And speaking of ideas I like, how about buying yourself a Miami Dolphins jersey using our special Chat Sports link that we'll put in the description of today's video in the comments. And wow, that aqua looks good. Maybe you missed Valentine's Day. Not to worry. Use our Chat Sports link on Fanatics and get one of these awesome Miami Dolphins jerseys. Your significant other will love it. And it won't matter that you were a little late on Valentine's Day because perfection is worth waiting for. And this Dolphins jersey from Fanatics, whether it be Jalen Ramsey or maybe a little throwback to a Tagovailoa, hot, heating up. But either way, get yourself one of these at chatsports.com/Dolphins jersey. We'll put that link in the comments as well. One click and you're there. The possibilities are endless, my friend. You got to check it out. And thanks to Fanatics for helping make today's show possible. Now, continuing on, this, and last but certainly not least, this might be the most practical decision for the Miami Dolphins as far as a trade candidate. Looking at the secondary, Jaycee Horn for the Carolina Panthers could be available via the trade market because he's entering his final year of that rookie contract and would be a little bit more affordable option for Chris Grier and the front office. And I know you're sick of hearing about the salary cap, but it's important to utilize the salary cap for your benefit when working through some trades, and a guy entering his final year of his rookie deal would fit into that category of maximum productivity without that expensive price tag. And Jaycee Horn, kind of an anomaly here, an interesting case study because he's only coming off a season in which he played 6 games. And in those 6 games, he played relatively well, especially according to Pro Football Focus. But, you know, that's not the end-all, be-all. It's just one more benchmark. But an 83 grade is among the premier cornerbacks in the National Football League. But again, that sample size of just 6 games doesn't necessarily allow you to be all in based on the production on the field because of just the 6 games played. But you look at where he might fit in, Horn that is, with this Dolphins cornerback depth chart. And obviously, Jalen Ramsey, undisputed cornerback number 1. But if you follow Dolphins today, you know I'm not the biggest fan of Xavien Howard. I think he's lost a step. And he's one of the highest paid players on the Dolphins roster. So I anticipate him being at the top of the list of Chris Grier's cut candidates because of how much money he makes and because of the lack of productivity. And maybe that's a little bit too harsh, but I just think Xavien Howard's had a great career, 8 years in the NFL, but has lost a step a little bit. Caterco, who at times showed some vulnerability in coverage. He showed that he can blitz as an effective nickel corner, but I don't think he's a guy that you're hanging your hat on. And we don't know what Cam Smith can do because he very rarely played. Ethan Bonner was signed to a futures contract. I don't think we're going to see Eli Apple back in a Dolphins uniform. And speaking of guys that have lost a step, he certainly would fit that mold, Eli Apple that is. So I'm excited about the potential of Cam Smith because I think he'll get a chance to actually play under new defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. But trading for Jaycee Horn is so appealing because he's a guy that can make an impact on the field. He's a guy that comes at a very affordable price tag, and he's a guy that the asking price might not be overwhelming for. So, of the 3 that I've listed for you, I want your voice to be heard on today's program. So let me know down in the comments. Pick a trade candidate, whether you want to go Laken Tomlinson on the offensive line, Dawson Knox as a tight end, or Jaycee Horn, the cornerback. Let me know by typing LT for Laken Tomlinson, Dawson Knox DK, or JH for Jaycee Horn. And you probably already knew this by the tone of my voice and by the delivery of the entire show, but I love the idea of Jaycee Horn. It makes a lot of sense financially. It makes a lot of sense with the skills that he can provide at the cornerback position. A fresh start for him with a team that's, in all indications, expected to be a contender, unlike Carolina, who you could probably make the case is in the worst state in all of the National Football League for a lot of different reasons. But get him out of Carolina and into Miami. And what might that look like when you think of the capital that the Dolphins have to use in the trade market? It might be as simple as just a 4th-round pick. Now, I know the Dolphins' draft capital is exceptionally precious because there's no pick for the Dolphins in the 3rd or 4th round, so they would have to find a way to get creative to obtain a 4th-round pick to trade for. And then moving on with Jaycee Horn could be a guy that you send either a couple of draft picks or maybe a 5th-round draft pick, but I think it would take something a little bit better. So Chris Grier and company could get to work by trading some of the Dolphins' draft capital. Let me know down in the comments, what do you give this trade proposal? A, B, C, D, or F? Let me know down in the comments. Let your voice be heard. Do you like the idea of trading for Jaycee Horn? Now, other trade assets to maybe have a conversation about. I don't think anyone's going to necessarily want Xavien Howard, even though he still has a couple of years on his deal. It's a very expensive deal. He's one of the highest paid players for the Miami Dolphins, but maybe a team would entertain the idea of bringing a proven veteran and former All-Pro back to the lineup for the Miami Dolphins. Interesting discussion to be had there. Channing Tindall just really hasn't found a way to make a mark for the Dolphins yet. So maybe another team would be interested in taking a flyer on a guy that at one time the Dolphins held high regards for, but I don't think that necessarily moves the needle for a lot of teams. Emmanuel Ogbah, the Dolphins saw a lot in him to offer him one of the most lucrative contracts. In fact, he's the highest paid player for the Dolphins base salary-wise. So he could be a guy that you really intrigue some teams with, although with that big of a deal, maybe not. And this one's very difficult because I don't want to trade Jaylen Waddle by any means, but I think if you look at the fact that he's still on his rookie contract, obviously he's a proven commodity in the National Football League. He's a dynamic playmaking wide receiver, and I think he and Tyreek Hill represent the best 1-2 duo as far as wide receivers are concerned in the NFL. And maybe you make a huge splash and obtain all kinds of draft capital by trading Jaylen Waddle away and picking up a wide receiver. Again, these are just ideas you're thinking out loud here. I don't necessarily love them, but I think when it comes down to it, the draft picks are probably the most feasible thing to trade for the Dolphins. And even though they don't have a pick in rounds 3 or 4, I think you could make the case that there's draft capital to be traded. You got those 2 6th-round picks as well as the 5th-round pick, and figure out a way to shuffle around those draft picks in order to obtain some trade capital for the Dolphins moving forward. Now, looking at that wide receiver depth chart, you got a guy like Braxton Berrios who likely won't be back with the Dolphins. I'm just going to go ahead and call that now. Same with River Craycraft. Eric Ezukama is a question mark given the neck injury as well. And so these are all players with a lot of question marks at the wide receiver position for the Dolphins, which is why I suggested drafting a wide receiver or making a trade to bring in some pass-catching targets for Tua Tagovailoa and the Miami Dolphins offense. And as harsh as it might sound, I don't think anybody's going to want Xavien Howard. I don't think anyone's going to want Emmanuel Ogbah or Channing Tindall for that matter. And so you're left with really, it takes 2 to tango, they always say. So you're left with either the draft picks or Jaylen Waddle, and I don't think either Dolphins fans, the Dolphins front office, or management as a whole want to see Jaylen Waddle go. Let me hear you. Let me hear you. Put your comments down in the comments. The percent chance the Dolphins make a trade this offseason. 1 through 100, what percent chance do you give it? Scale it for me in the comments. 1 through 100. Let me know and let your voice be heard. All right, help us continue to grow. We want to reach 58,000 subscribers by the end of February. Can we do it? We're getting closer and closer to 56,000. We got to get to 58,000. So if you know a Dolphins fan, let them know, hey, free Dolphins content every single day. Subscribe to the channel. Give it a trial basis. If you try it for a week and you don't absolutely love it, it'll break my heart, but you can unsubscribe. Nobody is holding you to it. We just would love you to be a part of the Dolphins Today family, the Dolphins Today community. And as somebody that's subscribed, you know it's the best Dolphins content out there. That's why you subscribe on Dolphins Today.